Welcome, everyone, to our Industrial Advisors podcast. You have Bill Condon and Matt McGregor, and our guest today is Greg Inglin. Greg is one of the top office brokers in the Seattle marketplace, consistently one of the top producers at Colliers, does as much institutional landlord leasing work as anyone in our market. And the topic that we want to cover today that I think everyone will find interesting is the office brokerage environment and the office market in general post-pandemic and kind of the state of the office market. And so no better person than Greg Inglin to discuss that. So Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here. It's the second time on the podcast. So
that's right.
I hope that's an elite group.
Yeah, I think he's the only second time. Yeah, the only guy ever invited back.
Good.
Yeah. We're hoping to have a little higher ratings
that's
time.
Right.
So
no promise.
Bring it.
Do it over.
No.
Hey, before we get started on this, you're comfortable with the microphone. Tell us about your background because I love it. A lot of people don't know this about you, but what is your background on the mic?
Well, I've been doing commercial real estate for about 15 years now, but before that, I was a sportscaster, like the local news sportscaster. Even though I have a face for radio, I somehow made it on TV, but I went to Washington State University in the broadcasting program, came out of that and kind of made my way moving around as you do, and then did that for 10 years and spent 5 years in Seattle, where I worked at Cairo 7 primarily and
awesome
covering Seahawks, Mariners, and all that stuff.
Good stuff. Well, welcome to the show.
Some good Lou Piniella stories there.
I'm sure.
I was there in the prime Lou's prime.
Yeah.
He was one of my favorites.
What a legend.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Good stuff. Well, Greg, thanks again for joining. Why don't you just get us kicked off? Obviously, we're going to talk about the current state of the market office, but let's back up a little bit and go, right at the beginning of COVID and through COVID, what happened to the office market?
Yeah, great question. I would equate it to the sound effect you hear in commercials when they have the record coming to a screeching halt, right? That sound, that's the office market. Like it completely stopped. I mean, it just the spigot was shut off. And the Seattle Bellevue office market was cranking. I mean, it was one of the top markets in the country because of big tech and the growth, and they're wanting to be here. So, if you're an office tenant, remember at the beginning of the pandemic, everyone went home. So no one was interested in talking about expansion. No one was talking about renewals. No one wanted to do anything. So, any kind of lease negotiation for the most part was put on hold or just stopped altogether. And then the second part that happened was tenants weren't using their office space. So they thought, well, if we're not using it, let's put it on the sublease market and see if see if someone wants to, take it on. So we more than doubled our amount of office sublease space in the Seattle market. So we went from about 1.8 million square feet of available sublease space to 4.3 million in Seattle. And the thing is, no one was leasing space, whether it was even if it was a sublease.
Right.
But the market was flooded with sublease space, and there was just no transactions because, if you think about 2020, we went through that whole year with nothing but uncertainty on when are we going to get past this pandemic? When are we going to get vaccinated? All through 2020, we didn't know that. So for the most part, we just were on hold trying to, monitor what was next, and no one really knew.
Were there tenants not paying rent? Were there landlords giving concessions or blending and extending, or what was going on from that perspective?
Yeah, that was the big concern going into it. Would people continue to pay rent, right? And the office market is one thing, and then retail is another. So for the most part, I would say there's statistics out there, but 97% of office tenants paid their rent.
Got it.
Because there's a lease obligation. You can't just walk away from that.
Sure.
And there was a belief that at some point you're coming back, so you will need office space. As it relates to retail, they operate on such thin margins to begin with. A number of retail tenants renegotiated their leases. Some of them closed down. Some of them got a deal from the landlord where maybe they didn't pay rent for 6 months, but they extended their term. So there's much more of rent abatement in the retail world than the office world. There was a little bit of it, but not that much.
Yeah, and a lot of corporate users here that were able to kind of see it through on the office side. Retail definitely got impacted more than any other segment, for sure. So I saw today that Amazon announced they're not coming back to the office until 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Just staying on the kind of post-pandemic office market, what do you think, what will change moving forward? So in 2022, what's the office market look like, and how has the pandemic changed the way companies look at office space?
Right. So there's two things there. How it has changed how they look at office space is, I think, the value of the office space or the quality of the space is more important than ever before, because you're asking people to, come back to the office, and you want them to be productive in the office environment. And so I think tenants really care about the quality of that space and what that looks like. And so it really depends on the user, whether it's tech or professional service. I think tenants care more about collaboration areas. So if you have a hybrid work model where people are in the office 3 days a week, but home 2 days a week, they're coming back working in teams, and you're trying to create spaces for them to collaborate, right? And so thinking of whiteboards or more open rooms where they're gathering around and trying to be creative. So I think the changes are more about the quality of the space. Does it have good, do you have a good kitchen area where people are going to, want to spend time? And then it's the, it's not just about filling desk space, right? It's about what does that look like when someone comes into the office. So I think that's one change. And then when they come back, that's the other question mark, right? What does 22 look like? I mean, picking up from the end of 2020 that I was just talking about, it all started changing really about March or April of 21. And of course, it's tied to the vaccination rate, right? So as people started getting vaccinated, we started seeing tours pick up, right? And each month since then, we've had more and more tours because real estate directors, decision makers are saying, okay, I know we're coming back to the office at some point. We need to start making some decisions. And again, we're driven by large tech. Large tech has fared very well through the pandemic. They're hiring people, and they need a place to put those people. So we now here have never, we're at our busiest we've been since the pandemic started, right? And, that might change as this Delta variant, plays itself out. It may delay people returning to the office, but I don't think it delays their decision making. I think what we've seen happen in 2021 is a recognition that there's a place for the office, and that plays a big part in these companies' decisions. So they'll probably continue to go through with the negotiations and the tours that they're doing right now because they're planning for the long term. And in the short term, it may delay it by 3 months, 4 months. We don't know. But I think the long term is still figuring out what the office environment looks like.
Sure. You haven't seen a significant amount of larger companies give back space.
No, I think we did. The two things have happened as far as giving back. Some of the sublease space that we talked about flooding the market, it sat there. And since January of 2021, every month but one, the amount of sublease spaces has fallen from the previous month. And that's because of two things. Tenants are coming back and starting to strike deals. Some of them are focusing on sublease space because that's the value proposition and it adds some flexibility. But also tenants are pulling space off the market. Some of those tenants that put sublease space on the market, they're pulling it off. There's a 2&U, a high-rise downtown. Tenant had 6 floors on the sublease market. They pulled 3 of those off about a month ago because they intend to use it.
Right.
And the other 3 floors, they said, they're only available for sublease up to 24 or 36 months. So they intend to use it.
Yeah.
So the sublease space is starting to come off the market. Some tenants, Bill, will still downsize. I think they're figuring it out. And, we talked about the hybrid model, right?
Yeah.
I think they're figuring out if they're going to do a hybrid model or not. So they don't know yet. But I think some will downsize, but generally big tech is not downsizing.
Makes sense.
On that big tech, talk about, kind of some of the trends that you're seeing, what those companies are saying with expectations when we get through the variants and when we get there. Do you see it long term that 3-day in, 2-day out is going to work long term? Is that the trend that you're going to say 7 years from now, that's what's stuck? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, I think we're still figuring it out. I mean, I think most companies would tell you they don't know, right? It's part of recruiting now, right? So are you going to say someone, it's strange in a way that we're talking about companies have to coerce their employees to come back into the office.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a standoff, it's kind of weird, right? And they don't want to be too pushy with it because they might lose them and lose them as an employee. But it's evolving. If you remember in 2020, the narrative was, we're never coming back to the office, right? Return to work is everyone's working from home. And now we're in mid-21, we're talking about, well, maybe it's a hybrid, right? And when we get into 22 and 23 and beyond, it's my belief that the majority will be back in the office. And of course, I'm pro-office, I realize that. But I think if you watch that trend line, because there's a lot of nuances to hybrid, right? Of course, everyone wants to have Monday and Friday off at home, right? But if you do that with everyone, then everyone's in the office, so you need the same footprint, right? You're leasing the same amount of space, so you're not saving money.
Right.
So, it's something that companies have to figure out. I think there is some form of hybrid that will work long term because it's been proven that it works and that people are receptive of it. But it's not easy to navigate and figure out exactly. So it's a moving target and it's a recruiting tool, but ultimately it depends on what kind of job you're doing. If all you're doing is back office work and data entry, you can do that remotely. But if your company is built on creativity and collaboration, right? I just know in my own business with my partners, when we're together, I learn a lot more about the market.
Yeah,
right. I know what's going on. We're better when we're together.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. We're better together. And so I just think that it depends on what you do.
For sure. And your office is right next to mine. So, you probably get a lot of knowledge from just stopping into my office.
I'm all for you working from home more often.
So I would say that happened with you and I too, Bill. Like I would say we probably, when we're in the office, I'll bet we have, on any given day, 20 live conversations that would not have happened, via phone call or via Zoom meeting.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so I would say from that standpoint, from creativity, ideas, quick meetings, at least for us, there's no replacing it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Not to mention the social aspect of it. I mean, at first, work from home seemed cool. I mean, it was kind of fun. It was, it was a benefit for me personally. Like I worked from home the other day just because of the kids' schedule and stuff. And, I still got my work done, but at the end of the day, I was like, I feel burned out.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd rather be in the office.
Me too.
Yeah. It's there's just more energy, right? And it brings everything together. So some of the big cities, right, like New York and San Francisco, Chicago, that rely on mass transit to get into the cities. Those have been impacted harder than most, but it sounds like it from what I'm reading, and I'd love for you to share some thoughts on this. Those markets have come back already in a big way. Great tour activity in New York, right? Deals are getting done. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge right now, and I think we're just operating in a silo as it relates to mass transit. Employees are reluctant to take mass transit because we're still not through this whole thing, right?
That's right.
When we get through it, think about the confidence we had once we were vaccinated, right? I think people, once we get through the Delta variant, and at some point we will, I think that with that confidence is a return to mass transit. But the bigger point is the urban environment. There's a demographic that wants that, and big employers that are after that employee base. And it's usually, the young tech employee. I mean, the reason they went into San Francisco and Chelsea Market in New York and Seattle is that employee they didn't want to be in the suburbs. And I don't think after this they will want to be either. I mean, they will want to be in the urban environment. And that's why, you look at the multifamily REITs, their stocks are up significantly because people are already starting to return to that urban environment. So the employers, I think, are going to continue to want to be in those urban settings.
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It's time to pull out your crystal ball. So
Okay.
12 months from now, what does the office environment look like?
Well, here in the Northwest, I mean, the Bellevue market already is extremely tight, because of what Amazon and Facebook and some of those big tech groups have done there already. Seattle isn't quite, where Bellevue is, but I think, over the next 12 months, there's a pretty significant shift in where Seattle is today to where it's going. I think, like a lot of markets, developments have been put on hold, right? And so you just don't ramp those up so easily, right? There's limited office supply in Seattle between now and 2024. And so as these subleases come off the market, more direct deals start to happen. I think at the end of 2022, we start to get back to a tighter office market. But the amount of transactions through the rest of 2021, we probably won't see many significant direct leases. We'll see some significant subleases, but 2022 will be back to more direct leases of significance. Bigger tech, is my belief, starts coming back and making home for all those employees they're adding.
Yeah, and it seems from the outside looking in, from a rate standpoint, rates haven't been impacted all that much here. I mean, they flattened out a little bit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, a few more deals get done, all of a sudden they're going to jump again, right?
Yeah, I think, what we saw on the rental rate, and it depends on the building, of course, right, how much vacancy they have. But for the most part, asking rents didn't move that much. I mean, they moved a little bit. Concessions went up, the free rent and the tenant improvement allowances went up, and the cost of TIs have gone up, right? I mean, because of labor shortages and materials and all that. So concessions are up. Rental rates really, they dipped maybe a little bit, but for the most part held steady. And I think they will hold steady, in my opinion, for, the next 6-12 months. And then, it's back to supply and demand, right? Mm-hmm. Demand's up. The horizon is limited supply. And that's when you can see some real rental growth as you get beyond 2022.
Awesome. Last prediction. Are you going to PR your next marathon, which is the Boston Marathon?
I think my PR days are over.
You just had one.
I know. I think I'm done after.
Okay.
It about killed me getting there.
All
so,
right.
But I am looking forward to running Boston in October, and I will run that as just to enjoy it. So,
for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really impressive considering how old Greg is. I mean, he's old.
Yeah, it's 75.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Greg, thanks for your insights. Great perspective on what's going on. I think a lot of people, it's a very interesting topic. So appreciate you sharing that. And we do, if you decide that industrial is just a much better market to be in.
It's a little complicated for him.
Yeah, I don't know if he's quite smart enough to figure that out. Yeah. We have a spot for you as a runner.
Oh, good.
On our team. Non-paid position.
Where were you last year? I could have used that.
That's right.
No, awesome, man. Thanks for jumping on with us.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Thanks guys.